guys, welcome to Daily Confetti. Today is Monday, July 8th, and Mercury's in retrograde, and things are getting crazy. Carter.
Apophenia is the word, Keri.
What's apophenia?
The tendency to mistakenly perceive connections and meaning between unrelated things, like Mercury being in retrograde.
All I'm saying is, a few days ago, this woman told me that Mercury was in retrograde and that things were going to get a lot worse in terms of communication problems. And you had a bunch of technical problems this morning, so she wasn't wrong. And my plumbing went crazy, and my ceiling needs to be replaced now. And
well, so you said she said communication problems. Now, anyone who watches the show knows I have tech problems all the time. So that's not new.
Yeah, but the one said this morning.
And you are communicating with an insurance agency. I've never heard of those communications going well. I
seriously, while we're doing this Daily Confetti, I have a chat up where I'm talking to my home warranty people because this is their fault because they didn't do this on Friday night. They didn't pick up the emergency line.
Well,
but what is the word for accurately predicting that things are going to get a lot worse based on Mercury being in retrograde?
Well, I think in order to claim that you've accurately predicted, you need to use the scientific method and have a model that consistently predicts over time, which also is falsifiable, right? There's a null hypothesis. So it's quite a feat to be able to predict. I guess you could call it prophecy, or you could call it science. If you can predict.
She prophesized my crap home warranty communication problems and my plumbing issues.
I don't think she did. I don't think she said you will have plumbing issues and have difficulty communicating with your insurance company. Although, if you have plumbing issues, the second one is assured to also happen. Well, it's definitely Mercury in retrograde is definitely bad for Jeffrey Epstein. Stein?
Oh, gosh.
I don't know.
This guy.
Well, we should probably mention why this guy's in the news again. He was arrested finally on Saturday in New York on charges of child sex trafficking. And this is partially in response to Cernovich and the Miami Herald winning a case to have records unsealed from previous charges against Epstein.
I thought he would never get his due.
Me too. Me too. I had kind of written him off as, one more piece of evidence that the swamp exists and the deep state is just going to keep doing its thing. But maybe not. Maybe not. Thanks to Mike Cernovich and a reporter from the Miami Herald, mostly. But should we just give people, I don't know that everyone knows. Should we give an overview of what the Jeffrey Epstein thing is?
You should give me an overview because I haven't been able to pay attention to get caught up on it because of my plumbing crap. So catch me up.
Well, you probably know the history. Look, why don't we just start at the beginning? And this is very high level. I mean, I've read some things. I actually did read the court documents from a few days ago and whatever. But
Jeffrey, this is what I know. Jeffrey Epstein is the guy who has the island they used to call Lolita, or he had a private plane called the Lolita Express. That was the name people jokingly called it because they knew that he was flying rich, important people out to this island to have sex with kids.
Well, it's a little more complicated even. So he was a hedge fund manager. Not clear how he made all of his money, although hedge fund managing is one way. And I've heard him referred to as multimillionaire, but also billionaire. So I'm not sure what it is, but if it's in the millions, it's the very, very high millions because it's sometimes reported as billionaire. He has a few private planes. He has houses scattered across the country. I think he has one in New Mexico, New York, Miami, and he has a private island. As you do, he has a private island, and in like 2001 to 2005 timeframe, the authorities were made aware of this. I guess the parents of an underage girl, had come to them with the story of being paid to go give him massages and then it turning sexual and blah, blah, blah. And so they started investigating this. And what they uncovered from what we know is quite extensive. He had I mean, allegedly, there's some reports that say it was hundreds of victims. He paid off, I think, 3 dozen or something like that. So, I mean, there's definitely large number of young girls. And the stories that were coming out were consistent between girls who didn't know. So this isn't like a Christine Blasey Ford thing where it's like, I don't have any evidence and it happened a long time ago and the one person who I cite doesn't remember it or whatever. This is like dozens of girls not in contact with each other coming up with the same story, evidence that's corroborated by not only their stories with each other, but also actual physical evidence from the home and all this kind of stuff. And what they were saying was that in Palm Beach, he has a house in Palm Beach. He was paying these young girls to come over and perform sexual. There's a variety of sexual things that they allegedly performed. But he would then, if they were uncomfortable or whatever, he would offer them a way out by saying, well, I'll pay you to go recruit more girls instead. So you can make money either giving me sexual favors or just recruiting other girls to give me sexual favors. And so it was kind of this pretty sick Ponzi scheme, almost, you can think of like a multi-level marketing scheme for getting underage girls. And these are girls that range, I think the youngest I saw was like 12 or 13, which is pretty freaking young. And then, 16, 17, I assume, I don't know if he had a max. But so not only was he doing that, and there was also talk of other people potentially being involved because Jeffrey Epstein was very well connected. And this includes, we can get into this, but
you can see pictures online. I've seen I'm sure a lot of our viewers have seen this. There's pictures of him with like Kevin Spacey. He was taking people like Bill Clinton out to that island. Bill Clinton went out there how many times? Like 12 or 13 times?
No, so yeah, wrong? So Bill went out more. So there's actually more to this. The plane itself was outfitted with a bed for sexual encounters on the plane. And so Bill Clinton, for example, he was on the plane several times, also several times without secret security or without Secret Service, right? So he also went to the island. But he's connected to everyone. It's not just the Clintons. Like, he's connected to Trump. Trump has said nice things about him and been at parties at his house. In fact, one of the accusers accused Trump of being one of the guys. So these accusers claim that these girls are claiming that not only did Epstein molest them and sexually victimize them, he also then lent them out to other people. So a prince. I forget the prince's one of the, like a prince in the UK. I forget which one. People like Bill Clinton, people like Donald Trump, like rich, powerful, what you would call kind of the deep state swamp, right? Because this guy was connected. And so anyway, believe it or not, that's not the scandal. So all of that was going on. The scandal happened, the reason this became even more scandalized, I'll say, is in 2007, so kind of after this investigation been going on, they collected a lot of evidence. The police in Palm Beach turned stuff over to the FBI because they wanted the FBI investigating. Well, Alexander Acosta, who was actually a Bush appointee, and he was the U.S. District Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. He was appointed by Bush and continued on under Obama in that role. And he met with Epstein's lawyers. So Epstein was obviously being investigated. He met with Epstein's lawyers, and some unusual things happened. He let the lawyers write a lot of this. They wanted a plea agreement. He let the lawyers write a lot of the plea agreement. And he broke federal law by, there's like, victims are supposed to have a chance to testify at the hearing and like be aware of what's going on. He circumvented the victims, didn't tell them what he was doing, and entered into a super, super light plea deal with this guy where he pleaded to prostitution, one or two prostitution charges with an underage person, which is a weird thing because there's no such thing as prostitution with an underage girl. That's called that's called rape or statutory rape. Underage girls aren't allowed to be prostitutes. They're underage. So it's not a prostitution. I mean, it's a weird thing, right? So he pled guilty to that. He did have to register as a sex offender, but I don't think in all states. He had to do some other thing. But the weird thing about it is in exchange for this, and he served, I think he had like an 18-month sentence, much of which was served out of jail and in this minimum security kind of thing. And sexual offenders are not allowed on work to like work from jail, but he was allowed to like leave jail 12 hours a day for 6 days a week.
Oh, he totally got off. That's why I was saying I didn't think he was ever going to get his due. He just, right. So it's like a slap on the wrist.
Total slap on the wrist. But the weird thing about this agreement is it's a non-prosecution agreement signed by this Alexander Acosta guy, or negotiated by him. I'm not sure I think he signed it. It agrees not just to not prosecute Epstein, but any of his potential co-conspirators and anyone potentially involved. So this would protect anyone in the swamp that Epstein has around, and that was maybe a part of this, all protected.
Yeah, that's
all of them.
Crazy.
And on top of it, the entire thing was sealed, so that and the victims were never told about it. They found about it on the news. The entire thing was sealed, so we don't know any of the real details. I mean, some stuff has come out, but originally it was sealed, and we don't know the details of how far this goes, who was involved, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of details that we just don't know because it was sealed. And this is what, I'm sure that up until very recently, people that talked about Lolita Express, which, as you mentioned, was the nickname of Epstein's plane, people who talked about Lolita Express and Jeffrey Epstein and ties to rich and powerful people were likely dismissed as crazy conspiracy theory Alex Jones people, because that's what mainstreamists want to do if they're not into the story. And they haven't been into the story. Probably one of the reasons is Bill Clinton was one of the major figures in the story. He's obviously one of the most prominent people that could potentially be involved. Was on the plane an awful lot, did go to the private island. Like, it doesn't look good for Clinton, probably. And these girls were on the planes, by the way. They have logs from some of these plane rides, and they know Clinton was on there. They know he was on there a lot without his Secret Service, and they know a lot of young girls were on there at the same time. They know that sometimes he went to the island. So they know all this stuff. But this has been relatively silent, and until there have been recent requests. And Cernovich was one of the leading people here. From my understanding, was Cernovich and the Miami Herald and another site called The Radar, I think, or Radar Online or something like that. And actually Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz also had been accused of being involved in this. He wanted the records unsealed because he thinks they will exonerate him. Cernovich and the Miami Herald and the other parties, they want the records unsealed because they want the freaking truth, right? So they petitioned to have these records unsealed. It was turned down, but that request was denied. But last week, that request was overturned. The denial was overturned, and the records are being unsealed. There's a press conference this morning with not a lot of new information, but the records, I think, later today will be unsealed. There may be some redaction still for, you probably want to redact names of underage victims and that kind of thing for their privacy, and that makes sense. But we may find out a lot more about who was involved. And so that's kind of my understanding of again, this hasn't been, I'm not like deep into this. I haven't been following it for years, but based on what I've read, which I've spent a decent amount of time reading, this is where we are right now. If you'll notice, the couple things from mainstream, we'll call legacy press. One is no credit to Cernovich at all. It's just like not mentioned. He spent years of his life and time and money trying to make this happen. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you like the guy or not. Kudos to Cernovich for this is a big win. And of course, the legacy media is just ignoring him.
I would like to point out that Cernovich is an actual journalist in my book now.
Yes.
and these swamp journalists, these activists posing as journalists, fake news, legacy media, they don't do anything like this. They feed us opinions and commentary disguised as news. They don't go out and do investigative journalism. They don't go out, I mean, with the exception of the people you're talking about, like the Miami Herald.
Very few.
For the most part, these like CNN talking heads, all these people who criticize people like Cernovich, they can jump off a cliff for all I care. He has done, this isn't the only thing the story that he's helped to break. Like, so.
No, it's not, but this is a big one.
This is a big one. I'm just saying this isn't the only time he's done this. He is a journalist in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a journalist, and he's a good journalist. And I think one of the things that you can look at is, look, this original deal was from 2007. So it's been, what, 12 years? So the legacy media has been doing nothing about this for quite some time. It took the rise of alternative media for someone to look at this and say, hey, why is all this shit sealed? Why don't we know the truth? Shouldn't we know the truth? Now, by the way, there's an implication that one of the reasons that Alexander Acosta made this deal was right around the time, remember, the financial crisis was happening or about to happen, depending on which part of the crisis you're talking about. Alexander Acosta Jeffrey Epstein was connected to a lot of people. I think he ended up testifying against some people at Bear Stearns or something like that. So it might have been that the government was like, we're just going to sacrifice these girls because, and let all these other co-conspirators off the hook because it's so important that we get a couple Wall Street execs. Now, that's possibly the calculus, but if that is the calculus, we don't know. I don't like that calculus, and I don't think a lot of people would. But we don't even have transparency into that being the calculus. We don't really know. And it is clear at this point that Acosta did break. So it looks like he broke some laws. He did things he should not have in with respect to making this deal. And certainly he offends every good person's sensibilities with this kind of a deal. Now, by the way, Acosta has gone on to he's now our U.S. Secretary of Labor, which is rich because he's in charge of sex trafficking. Like Secretary of Labor would be in charge of some of this stuff. So, and investigating sex trafficking. So that's where he is now. Now, if you'll notice, the legacy media, they have no choice at this point. They have to talk about this. They haven't wanted to talk about this for a while. Now they have to talk about it. And they're doing a few things. One is they're leaving out Cernovich. And two is they're trying to make this about Trump. Now, I will be the first to say, if Donald Trump is implicated in this, burn him too, right? Like, fuck them all. If he's one of the people that's been doing this, fuck him and burn him to the ground just like everyone else. But there's way less evidence that Trump was as deeply involved. And there's a lot of stuff that implicates the Clintons, specifically, and other Democrats. And the mainstream media is pretty silent on that. They're trying to turn this into a Trump thing, and it's not a Trump thing. Sorry, Keri, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, didn't he only go to the island once and never went back?
I don't think he ever went to the island.
I think he did, and he left.
I thought he never went to the island. Maybe. I don't know the details. But, and he's done Trumpian things like, say, Jeffrey Epstein's a great guy. He likes women just like I do. I mean, Trump talks nice, he says nice things about Kim Jong-un. So, yeah, he said nice things about Epstein. He may, look, I don't know whether the allegations against Trump are true or false. This isn't about Trump. This is about the swamp. This is about the deep state protecting the swamp. And these people are swamp rats. They are getting away with this, and we've got a government that turns a blind eye. And if Trump has to come down because we take the whole thing down and he's part of that whole thing, fine. I don't think he is as involved as some of the anti-Trump people want to think he is. They're like, oh, how could he have appoint the Republicans appointed Alexander Acosta as the U.S. Secretary of Labor. Damn Republicans, they're always into sex stuff, right? They're always into, it's always the Republicans. That's the leftist view right now, which is dishonest because, of all the politicians that Epstein was most closely connected, it was by far Bill Clinton was the most connected and most likely to be involved here. But, could be some other people. I think an honest person looks at this and says, I don't care whether it was Trump or anyone. We need to know the truth. And we may actually find out the truth.
Kevin Spacey went to the island several times. You know who else went to the island? Bryan Singer.
Oh, that's not surprising. Maybe it wasn't just young girls.
No, of course it wasn't. I don't think that. Why would you have only young girls there? Yeah, Kevin Spacey went with Bill Clinton.
Keri, I think we should have a discussion about what we're trying to do as a society. If we're trying to build a moral society in a certain way, some things that I think we're doing wrong here. Because obviously we can make it illegal to prey on young girls, and we have. Great. We could drain the swamp and do a better job of prosecuting people and not letting them get away with it. But ultimately, this stems from a culture, and I think we're doing some things that contradict each other as a culture. If what we want is a culture where young women are protected until they're adults from the manipulations of predators. And I'm not even talking about violence. I don't think there's accusations of violence here necessarily, but one of the reasons that it's immoral to have sexual relationships with minors is there's a power position. That's one of them. There's a power difference. And the other one is you're an adult, you can manipulate them and they don't understand. There's a lack of ability to consent is what we would call it, right? They don't have.
That is violence. I mean,
I'm saying not like punching or like that's,
right. But I know what you're saying, but that is violence. And I don't think that's like a words is violent. I'm not saying that in a words is violence way. I'm saying like taking that from someone who is not able to give consent and messing them up in the head for the rest of their life.
Right. It's definitely predatory behavior that I think we should outlaw. Like I'm all for outlawing it. In fact, I think you could make an argument that, people's brains aren't done being developed until 24, 25. Like, I don't know when it becomes predation. But the flip side of this, not really a flip side, but the other part of this is culture. And I think we live in a culture where on the one hand, we claim that we want to protect young girls. On the other hand, we do things that go against that. And I think we need to recognize something that's an uncomfortable fact, but it's a fact. Once a girl, young woman, girl has hit puberty, once she's hit puberty, it is natural for men to be attracted to her. That's what happens in the animal kingdom. It's what happens in humans and has throughout history. I mean, there's probably many people's great grandparents may have had kids when they were 14 years old. Like that happened very recently. So I'm not talking about prepubescent girls, but I'm talking about once they hit puberty, there is a natural attraction to that because it's youthful and fertile, and that's an animal instinct. Natural is not moral.
It's still gross.
Yes, natural is not moral, and I want to be clear. Natural and moral are two different things. So I'm not saying it's moral, it's immoral, but it's a natural tendency of every species, including humans. Now, I would like to build a society, I think most people do, where that behavior is not allowed because we view it as immoral. So preying on someone just because they've hit puberty, that doesn't make them fair game. You're not allowed to be a predator in that way. I think most of us want to build a society like that. I get that. However, I think we're doing a few things wrong if that's the society we're trying to build. It's good that it's illegal. Obviously, it's bad that we're not prosecuting it well. But we're also, Keri, you and I talk about this. We sexualize young women a lot. With the fashion and the behaviors and even just talking, how we talk to them about sex, how we in the media and our Hollywood culture, we glorify
Oh, we
Uh,
sexualize young boys now too.
yes,
Like,
yes,
look
you're
at
right.
all this YouTube makeup tutorials with like prepubescent young boys making themselves to look like adult women. It's disgusting.
I hadn't thought of that, but thank you for that image. Um, uh, yeah, no, but so we sexualize young girls. We also fetishize youthful appearance and behavior. So the thing that came to mind was, have you heard of this Belle Delphine girl on Instagram who's like selling her bathwater to gamer
Yes.
guys? Okay,
Yes.
I had never heard of her, but I went and looked her up. I'm like, what the hell is this? And someone on Twitter put it really well. I'm gonna ruin their tweet, but I'll paraphrase. It was something like, I look at her Instagram feed and I feel like I've been transported 50 years into the future, and there's just a culture that I completely don't understand. I feel the exact same way. I look at that. I'm like, I don't understand what's happening, but some things are clear. She's trying to make herself look extremely young, like girlish, right? Not like a young woman, girlish. She's trying to make herself girlish, and she's trying to act in girlish ways. And so that's a way that we fetishize youth. And if we're doing those things, that's not a signal to men that, hey, you're not supposed to view young girls as sexual objects. That's a signal that you are supposed to view them that way. And those signals are incongruous with the supposed moral culture that we want, which I want, which is protecting these young women until they're adults so they can protect themselves. And the final thing I want to say about this, Keri, is I think there's a fundamental way that we view sex, which is, I'm not sure how we should be viewing sex. So I'm not a Puritan. I'm much more libertine. And so I know there's this kind of attitude in society that's moved to the point where we view sex as something purely physical. It's purely a physical act. You go on Bumble, you go on Tinder, you have a good Friday night, be done. And I think that's a naive view of sex, because sex does come with consequences. But that's the view of sex that we seem to be pushing as a society. And, a lot of feminists push that as well. And so if we're going to push that view of sex,
that it's divorced from relationships.
Yeah, it's divorced from relationships. And so when sex is tied to relationships, you actually get a different experience of sexual attraction. If you're looking at relationships, if you're looking at, let's say you're a guy, you're looking at women as potential sexual partners, but that's tied up with relationships, so they're together, right? Well, your evaluation of them goes well beyond what their physical appearance and beauty is. So I think most guys that are, middle-aged like me can experience this, where, you can see a young hot girl and be completely turned off by her because she's not someone you would want to even have a conversation with, let alone a relationship. It's like, she's like a child. I don't like them. There's no equality of life circumstances or mental abilities or life experiences or intellectual ability to communicate. It doesn't fit, because you're viewing her, if you have this view of sex, you're viewing her as like not just a sex object that's only physical, but like this would be a relationship thing, and that just spoils the entire attraction, as it should, right? As it should. But if you
I don't know if I'm going to say something anecdotally here. That's just naturally how women, or at least in my experience, that's how I view. I don't look at young, like 20-year-old men and I'm like, oh, I'd like to get with that guy. Like, I think they look like children.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think women in general, I don't know, I'm not an expert here, but I think women in general have a more, a less physical view of their sexual partner and a more emotional relationship driven view. You're right. Yeah. So that makes sense.
I'm just speaking in general. I know there are women who definitely would look at that, but I'm just saying, I think women are probably more likely to naturally just evaluate people in that way, maybe.
No, I think you're absolutely correct, Keri. I think you're right. But when we're in this society, we're divorcing sex completely from everything else. It's just a physical thing. It's like shaking hands, right? When that's what you do, think about how that changes the mental calculus of looking at a very, very young woman who's post-pubescent but still very young, it changes that mental calculus, because suddenly I've been taught to not view women as something to be in, as a human to be in a relationship with, but as something to fuck. They're just an object that's only physical. And if the standards of attractiveness are purely physical, then those youthful girls win every time, because they're more attractive and they're younger and they're more fertile. Like, that's what happens if you're just talking about physicality. But you shouldn't just be talking about physicality. And so I think that's where we're in this weird thing where, as a society, we're like, hey, we want to protect these women, but we're going to sexualize them. We're going to fetishize acting like super young women, and we're going to divorce sex completely from everything emotional or intellectual or spiritual and make it just physical. And that should be fine. And the answer is that shouldn't be fine. Those things don't go together. Of course, you're going to have increased predation if that's the culture that you're pushing. And it doesn't excuse the predators. They should still be, you don't say to Jeffrey Epstein, well, I understand the culture pushed a view on you that was, difficult to deal with. Like, no, it's still his fault. The guy should still, I don't know, I'm against the death penalty, but anyway, still, maybe, right? So the guy should still burn. But if we're trying to build a culture that protects these, if we actually care about these young women, we need to really rethink how we're treating sex and how we're sexualizing young women, because it does create a culture of predation. And
well, I've recently become more conservative on this issue too. Like, I agree with you. I look, if you divorce it from relationships, okay, so I've become more conservative on it, probably because of being a new Christian, and I eventually came to believe, just in the past few months, that I don't agree with sex outside of marriage anymore, and that's right. A really new belief for me. But take God out of it, take my reasons, take that out of it entirely. It's a scientific thing. When you're having sex with someone, your body's releasing bonding chemicals. Your brain's releasing oxytocin. You're bonding with a person that maybe you shouldn't be bonding with.
Right.
Maybe, I know a lot of people get into relationships that they shouldn't be in, and they develop feelings for someone that maybe they shouldn't be developing feelings for because they're having sex with them.
Well, and actually, women use this to hook guys, right? That's why women throw sex at guys, because they feel like the strategy is, I sleep with him right away, and because she's bonding, she assumes that he's also bonding. So I sleep with him right away. He bonds to me. Now he's stuck. And that's unfortunately doesn't, sometimes it works for a while, but it's not the basis of a relationship, and it won't last generally. But yeah, look, I'm not as sexually conservative as you are. I don't think that I'm fine with sex outside of marriage. And I'm actually fine with a more libertine sexual world, kind of. I just don't, I think that we need to understand there are consequences. And so we need to dial it back a little bit. Like, it can't be, we need to understand what it is that we're doing and why, and the consequences that has. And so, I mean, there's a lot tied up with sex, and it's a very complicated issue, and we're generally not monogamous, even though we claim to be. A lot of people cheat, right? So we have a lot of issues in our society around sex and monogamy, and I get all that. And so I'm not of the opinion that sex should only stay inside marriage. And I am a little bit more libertine with what you should be doing sexually, what you could possibly do sexually. But I do think that completely divorcing it from relationships entirely and saying that it's just this physical thing and it's fine for everyone to do whenever, and when we teach it in junior high school and we talk about all the different ways to have sex as soon as the kid's old enough to read, which is what's being pushed right now, and we glorify women who make themselves look young and sexual all at once, and we sexualize these young girls. Well, those things have really severe consequences, and we should be a lot more cautious about sex than we are being, I guess. It's not very profound, but I don't know the answer. I just know that there's a problem here and we're not taking it seriously. I guess that's it.
It's a cultural problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
On that note, I think we should just wrap it up, Keri. What do you think?
I think so. Thank you guys for tuning in. And
Yes.
thank you for sharing.
Please follow us on YouTube and subscribe star. And yeah, have a good day.
Dear AI gods, consider this a sacrifice to the social justice warriors at YouTube. Any robot that's listening, I hope that you will allow our channel to continue to exist. We offer up this reading of Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack of White Privilege. I see a pattern running through the matrix of white privilege, a pattern of assumptions which were passed on to me as a white person. There was one main piece of cultural turf. It was my own turf, and I was among those who could control the turf. My skin color was an asset for any move I was educated to want to make. I could think of myself as belonging in major ways and of making social systems work for me. I could freely disparage, fear, neglect, or be oblivious to anything outside of the dominant cultural forms. Being of the main culture, I could also criticize it fairly freely. In proportion as my racial group was being made confident, comfortable, and oblivious, other groups were likely being made unconfident, uncomfortable, and alienated. Whiteness protected me from many kinds of hostility, distress, and violence, which I was being subtly trained to visit in turn upon people of color.